Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Aultman. I'm broadcasting to you live from Roswell, Georgia, which is on the north side of Atlanta. It's a lovely day here. I hope it's a great day where you are. We're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to talk about migrating applications into the new EPM Cloud SKU, the one that's got all the stuff bundled in. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. We'll cover a lot of the basics there, and I'll tell you, what our experiences have been moving people into that, both from on-prem and from the older cloud services. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some cool stuff that you can do inside of there. Once you're in there, I'm using the Groovy programming language to do things that maybe you've never thought of before, things that planning hasn't been able to do before, but now we can because we have this language available. I am from interRel Consulting, and I hope that you've heard of us, and I hope you know a little bit about us. I'm proud to work here, and chances are you've seen this slide a few times during the conference. So I'll just say I think you're a great company, and I love the people that I work with, and I'm going to move on a little bit. If you have seen this, our webcast, these demos coming up in December are going to be really cool with the different cloud products. You get to see some breaking news, Essbase 19C. Not a lot of people have seen that, so that'll be a great chance if you get a chance to get out there and do that. But with all that said, let's get into our actual content for what this presentation is all about. Back when we first had the idea to do this conference, and I had the privilege of being in on the call at the time when the idea first came up and we began to flesh it out, we talked about this having a retro sort of flashback feel back to the Solutions Conference from 2007, and Edward said that if you had done a presentation back then, you were automatically going to be accepted. So I was like, great, because I did do a presentation back then, and it was a case study of our migration from older version of both Essbase and Planning into System 9202. And some of you may remember some of the images from way back then. The process was not very easy. In fact, it was pretty hard to install this. They had the license server. It was very difficult. And the reason I want to talk about it right now is I want to contrast that to where we are now, where all of those installation woes are completely removed from our consideration, and we can just get applications available for us to use. Another thing that we presented about there was some customizations that I had done on the user interface in the on-prem version of Hyperion Planning. Once we got it migrated in, we had System 9 running. We found that we had the ability to dive in and do some customized JavaScript stuff behind the scenes, and I did some pretty cool stuff to make certain cells in our grid read-only. We had a model that had dimensions that were virtually identical, and one was data moving from a dimension and a two-dimension, and they had all the same members in them with just slightly different names. And it didn't make any sense where those two identical members matched up in our form for that to be a writable cell, although security allowed it to be. So I went and I snuck in behind the scenes every time a form got rendered, and when the rows and the columns had the same member on it, I made it read only, so it just made a nice diagonal line along that grid, and that was pretty cool. I would love to be able to show it to you, except I have no idea where that presentation is anymore. I even reached out to my old colleagues, but nobody had any images I could show, but it was something I was pretty proud of at the time. But today we're here to talk about EPM Cloud in the new world in 2020. Just in case you haven't heard this news yet or have this defined to you, what we're talking about here is all of the things that have been available for a number of years as individual products. Planning and budgeting cloud service, financial closing consolidation cloud service, account reconciliation cloud service, those kinds of things. They're all available in one bundled package now. And since I think everybody probably knows that, I'm just hopefully getting people to catch up. But since I probably don't need to go into deep explanation here. Let's see about what we can do with that. There are two ways that we can get into this new SKU. I can't just change my licensing and continue to use my old stuff if I'm in the cloud, but I can migrate there. I can go from my on-prem applications like this, or I will have to migrate from any current cloud EPM applications that I'm in that are the older products. If I want to move over into the new one, I've got to get new applications in pods set up, and I've got to move my stuff over, and then I can take advantage of the stuff that's in that bundle. So with that said, a lot of people have been migrating for a long time. I know what it is exactly, because the two dates that Planning and Budgeting Cloud Service was released, and when version 11.124 of the EPM suite were released, one was on Valentine's Day in 2014 was when PBCS came out. I was at a client delivering one of my strategic services assessment deliveries, and they just dropped it. This was a big surprise, but that was pretty cool. And then they released EPM version 11.124 on January 27th of 2015, my birthday, which is why I remember that. But the point here is it's been quite a while that people have opportunities to gain experience and figure out how to migrate from on-prem databases since it's been out for quite a while. 6 years in the IT world, in the EPM world, in the business world, as this band will tell you, is a pretty long time. Now, and because of that, there are thousands of different use cases that already exist for migrating from on-prem. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. But just for my due diligence and to fulfill my promises on talking about migration, I'm going to cover just a couple of kind of two ends of a spectrum on experiences that we've had migrating companies out to the cloud from on-prem. The first was a healthcare company, and they just had one planning application, and it was pretty good. I mean, they weren't unhappy with it. They were being forced off of their servers. Like their IT department was saying, we don't want you on servers anymore that we own. We want you to get out to the cloud. So they're like, okay, well, we can go and do some sort of cloud infrastructure and have this stuff hosted and move our stuff over onto virtual servers in somebody's cloud service out there, or we can go ahead and do the plunge right now and move into the EPM cloud space, and you can get the upgrade for planning. You can get some of those new features and interfaces and stuff now, instead of having to do it in another few years' time. So they made that migration, but because they didn't want a lot of changes to happen, they just did what we call lift and shift. Now, we don't normally like to do lift and shift because usually there's a lot of opportunity to improve what you're doing and look at your practices and improve them. And at a minimum, we like to recommend what we call move and improve. But in this case, it was a lift and shift. And just the regular migration tools that you use, the dimension export and lifecycle management and all those things, they work pretty well. You'll note here that if you're not at least on version 11.123 of these products on-prem, you're going to have some trouble migrating it unless you do like an upgrade on-prem to get to 11.124. And then you can use the LCM and use those tools, and they work better. 11.123 and 11.124 are the only versions that are certified for migration, LCM migrations up into the cloud. That did not take very long. That's 5 weeks that it took to do that, and that includes validation and testing. That's on the easy side, so it can be pretty breezy to get out there in the cloud, depending on who you are and what your needs are. On the other side of that, this was actually another healthcare company, and they had a completely different situation. Their planning application was there, but they pretty much didn't like it. I mean, the reason I was called in to do the assessment for this client was just kind of help them figure out what to do about their planning application that wasn't meeting their needs. And so we put the whole plan together, and we pretty much re-implemented their planning, and we opened it up to more users, and we implemented the frameworks, or what you might call the modules, financials and workforce. So in a sense, this wasn't so much a migration as it was rebuilding it. But because they were an on-prem planning customer and they had that application, it's fair to think of it as a migration to the cloud, because what we're doing is taking what they do and expanding it and improving it, and then adopting some features like those modules or frameworks that are only available in the cloud. So it could be considered a migration, and then like this total adoption of cloud possibilities that didn't exist before. That project took over a year, and it was, you know, pretty involved, and it had a lot of ups and downs. We got through it successfully, and that's sort of the other end of the case studies on moving from on-prem out to the cloud. What you may have tuned in for, and this is the interesting part of the migration story here, is if I'm already on PBCS or EBS or FCCS or ARCS, any of those things that have the CS at the end, and they were, you know, sold as individual things, how do I get into the EPM Cloud? How do I get into that bundle? And so on that regard, I do have news about that. And if you wait for it just a second, okay, it's pretty easy. There's not a whole lot involved with this migration, just a few things we need to take care of. And I'm going to actually make it even easier for you to do this migration than it has been for us to do the migration, because I'm going to tell you everything that you need to do to get it done. So the first thing you need to do is you've got your EPM Cloud pod set up. They exist out there, and they're ready to be turned into applications. The first thing you do is need to go in and make sure everybody that is as part of your other applications out there are provisioned to log in, and whatever roles that they need to have within the application that you're migrating to. You need to do this first, because you're going to be migrating security along with everything else. And if your target system isn't aware of these people, then you're going to get security import errors, because it's not going to know how to set that up or who to associate security with, because it won't have heard of these people before. So that's kind of a lesson learned for us, because it's easy to forget this step if you haven't done it before. So just remember, do all your user provisioning first before you go in to do your migration. So on the target side, where I'm moving my application from somewhere into here, I don't really have to do any setup. So what you see on the screen here, if you've never seen this before, this is what you get in EPM Cloud when you've just set up a pod for the first time. It doesn't really have an application set up. I can turn it into any one of these applications. I can I can create one and play with it for a little while and completely wipe it out. And once I wipe it out again, I'll get this back when I log into that pod. It can be in this state when I go and do my migration, as long as I've got a user ID and a password provisioned here, then I can go and do the migration. The thing that I'm going to do that with is EPM Automate. So I want to make sure that I have downloaded the latest version of EPM Automate from the target environment, the EPM Cloud environment, so that I make sure that I've got everything is compatible and it's going to go really smoothly. There's a command inside of there called copy snapshot from instance. You can see we got it right here. And you can see you got an easy road if we use this tool for most of these applications. We've got planning, we've got strategic workforce planning, we got sales planning, financial close, consolidation and close, tax reporting, profitability and cost, account reconciliation, and enterprise data management. The only place this isn't an option for you to do that migration is for narrative reporting. So you're going to be a different type of export and import there, a little bit more manual. But you can see here, this one command inside of EPM Automate is going to basically do all the work for you, which is pretty cool. Let's have a closer look at that particular command. This is just a snapshot of the documentation, and I want to point out a couple of things that aren't quite obvious, and you kind of got to figure out when you're doing this stuff. But you can see it's going to take the snapshot. So, if you're not familiar with how that works in these cloud applications, every night it's taking a complete and total snapshot of that system, and it's putting it out there and archiving, and you can download it, but it basically defines the entire thing, soup to nuts, in a snapshot. And what we're going to do is reach over and grab the snapshot from somewhere else, bring it over into the target, and load it up. So that's what this does. A couple of little technical notes about how this works. Note, in order to do this, I'm going to be logged into EPM Automate here, on my local computer or my automation server, whatever has EPM Automate installed. I'm going to sign into the target environment. So I'm going into EPM Cloud that doesn't have anything in it yet. And then when I provide the URL here on the command line, right there, I'm going to provide it with the URL on the other side. So when I log in is when I give it the URL of my target environment where I'm moving into. And then when I issue this command, I give it the URL of the other place where the data is coming from. And the other thing to note is that the password file, this says the password file is the name and location of the file containing the encrypted password. Well, okay, just what about regular username and password on the command line? That is not going to work for this command. So I know that you can log in using EPM Automate, and you can just type your username and password there on the command line and it works. But for this command, you're not able to take advantage of this type of login here that you see highlighted. We're going to have to go with this type of thing where we're providing a password file. So how do you do that? I will show you how to do that as well. We have to use the encrypt command, which is also in EPM Automate, and we're going to give it our password. This takes it on the command line, and then it's going to encrypt it up and turn it into illegible characters and drop it into a file on the hard drive, and then we'll be able to refer to that file when we run the other commands. And you can use it for login in the future after that, and you can use it to run the copy snapshot command as well. A couple of technical notes on this command as well. When you give it the password file that you want to export to, you want to make sure that you use the .epw extension. It says it has to be that. I haven't tested otherwise. I've just trusted this, but make sure that that file is a .epw. And second, you'll see this, if you go and search for how to use this command out on the internet, you'll find a lot of bloggers have done this, right? They tell you how to encrypt your password in PBCS, but they kind of gloss over there. One that didn't, but everybody else just kind of glosses over this one thing. Like, what is this my key thing, right? It says, is the private key that is used to encrypt the password. Well, just, okay, what does that mean? How do I use it? What do I put there? Am I referencing a file, a key file? I know something about public key, private key, how to generate keys with different commands. The good news here is it's not as complicated as that. You can basically type anything in here that you want. Probably a good idea to use something sensible and remember it, but you could literally type my key here and it would work, or you could put something a little bit more sensible. In the end, you got to get something in there. It's going to use that and leverage that for the encryption piece, but then it's not going to matter later on. So if you were just trying to find that information on the internet, you might have a hard time doing that. So here you go, that information right there for free. Now, when I do that command, so I've encrypted my password into a file, I've run the command, I've logged into my target URL, and I've asked it to go over to the source URL and drag that snapshot over. Well, that actually happens pretty fast because it goes straight over like cloud to cloud, right? And it's not coming through my computer. And it's going to completely wipe out anything that was in target before. So if you weren't in that sort of initial state where you could go anything and the possibilities are endless, when you issue this command, whatever is in there at that, it could be narrative reporting, it could be account reconciliation, and if I pull over a snapshot from a planning instance, that other thing's just going to go away, and now it's going to be a planning instance. So this could be a way to, test out some things. But typically, you're going to use this command. Once you're migrated in, you'll use this command to do things like clone your development environment into your QA environment or your production environment, however many environments that you're working with there. So that's just a fair warning. There's no going back to what was there before after you do this. It's going to just totally wipe out what was there. So now we've done that migration and we're inside of EPM Cloud. There's some pretty cool stuff going on there, and there's some things that you should probably note now that we're in this new world. If you're wondering, you know, like, how do I access these different applications that are inside of this bundle, that's still not a whole lot different from if you had bought multiple of the older products. You're still going to have a different URL to log into for the different applications, and so those pods still exist, similar to before. You can take any given pod, and I can make it the profitability and cost right now, and then when I don't want it to be anymore, I can take that away and I can make it narrative reporting or whatever. Like I can turn those individual pods into whatever application that I want, but they're still, you know, little self-contained units, and they're doing more and more to get those units to talk to each other and connect to each other and share data. But in the end, like, you're going to be putting a different URL in your browser to make that all work. There's a change. A lot of you probably did not hybrid enable your planning applications. It was possible, it still is possible in EPBCS. You can turn on hybrid through an SR, and it will make the database in your planning application a hybrid Essbase database. All of the databases in EPM Cloud are hybrid enabled. If you've migrated in, you might not even know, because all of your sparse dimensions are going to be set up with stored members anyway, so it's not even going to be attempting to use the hybrid engine. But if you went and removed the stored and made it all dynamic on those dimensions, you might see a dramatic performance improvement because of that, not having to aggregate. So your business rules might run a heck of a lot faster, and you just need to do data validation and make sure that all the calculations are still occurring correctly. And there's a cool thing too. No matter what you have just migrated in, whatever it was that you owned before, you probably didn't own most of these things, definitely not all of these things. You now have the opportunity to try out the other products that maybe you wanted to try before, but you didn't want to go through the whole acquisition process. You didn't want to sign up for 3 years of this and be on the hook to pay for it if it didn't wind up meeting your needs. Well, now you can go and try it out and see if it will meet your needs, and it doesn't cost you any more because it's all part of the same license. So let's have another look at what's available. If we want to do planning, we haven't done that before because we've only done close, we can just turn that on. So planning is available. Financial close is available, and that's the replacement for the on-prem HFM, and that lets me do my intercompanies and all my currency conversions and all that stuff I need to do to close the books. Profitability and cost management, that's the really powerful allocation engine. So if I want to find out, if I want to take expenses like shared services expenses and push them down all the way down to customer level if I want to, or product level, whatever, however many ways I want to allocate that, I can get down to true profitability along, in a very detailed way. Enterprise data management will be a way to manage your metadata, your hierarchies, your dimensions. So that's a really cool way to centralize, a bunch of dimensions that you can then share out to the other applications. And narrative reporting is another thing that's going to be available. One thing to note about being in EPM Cloud, when you first acquire it, you're going to have the opportunity to get a certain number of pods available to you. And each one of those pods is going to have a dev and production in it. But what you're going to have is open permission to get as many of these as you want. But what you want to do is think about how many you're going to need realistically at the beginning and get them right away. We have people right now that are struggling to get additional pods added to their it's made available to them, and part of it is because you have to go back to the sales organization and they work up like a $0 order, then it gets processed, and then you get the new thing. I don't know if that's going to be improved. I hope it will be, but I just don't have any news at all on that. So just bear that in mind. Try and go ahead and get a reasonable number of them at the beginning, so you won't have that hard time adding on later until you're really taking advantage of it. Of course, you can add on. They'll let you add as many as you want. That's what they say, and it makes sense. The more ones you add, the chances are more users are going to be using the system, so that shows up in the per user subscription cost. So it's win-win on both sides. So one thing that I didn't really cover on that architecture diagram, so to speak, but is a new possibility inside of the EPM Cloud, is what we call Freeform Planning. So in the past, all your planning dimensions, planning applications have had these dimensions that are required. Like I have to have a version dimension, I have to have a scenario dimension, for example. A lot of applications, that these multi-dimensional applications, and a lot of ones that we've created in database, they don't have I mean in Essbase, not in database, they don't have these dimensions that are required in planning. Well, they've released those restrictions, and I can get a lot more Essbase-like stuff going on in there because the dimensions are much more under my control. I can have the ones that I want, and if I don't want those ones that are required, I don't have to have them. I can build out that model with whatever dimensions I need. Now, I know what you're thinking. Has this guy really put an image of one slide onto another slide? And the answer is yes, I did do that. I use this slide frequently when I'm explaining how it works, but I just wanted to be able to explain a little bit about the slide. So you get a meta slide here, and if that makes your head hurt, I'm sorry, but this is what I wanted to do for you today. Another thing to look at will be narrative reporting. We have been talking about narrative reporting for years. We have been trying to get people to migrate this and adopt this, not only because it's a strategic direction, but it does some really cool stuff. Stuff that you can't do in financial reports, especially on the narrative reporting half of that, where I'm assembling those report packages, board books, and whatever. That I'm going to do those larger multi-page documents, but this is going to be available to you. This is one that I definitely recommend that you look at adopting as one of your first new capabilities once you're in the EPM Cloud environment. I want to tell you a little bit of what that's like. If you are currently using financial reports, your experience on migrating your reports from there, because you can do that. You can get from financial reports into management reports. That can be a challenge. It depends on kind of who you are and what you're doing. So the first case study in this is another one of those two sides of the spectrum thing. These are people that they had done EPBCS really not that long ago, and they had built out some FR reports, and it was all reasonably fresh within the last few years. Develop of that application and those reports, and there wasn't a lot of history and legacy and changes and things that had happened to those reports. Getting those to import really it wasn't that difficult. There tends to usually be a couple of things that may be wrong with some of your reports that you can go and fix and then import those. It's not a surprise there to do little tweaks on things to get them to import cleanly. But for this project, the bulk of the time that people were doing that migration, it wasn't the migration itself, it was just validating, because you always got to go and run the report and look at the data and be really careful to make sure that the report still works the way you need it to. And then one quick caveat on doing a migration here is if you create data sources in management reporting on the target side that are named exactly the same as what's in FR, then that migration will go more cleanly, because it will understand what the connection information is when it comes across. Now, the second case study on this is the other side. This is a company that had been using financial reports for a long time, and those reports had been created years and years ago in the desktop studio that nobody likes, and the people that had built those had long been gone, and they'd had turnover, and then more turnover, and then more turnover, and there's nobody left that had built those, and changes that they needed had been just kind of Band-Aid and Frankenstein on top of it. So they were really complex and messy. And it wound up being really difficult to import those because of all this technical debt and messiness that was in there. And one thing that management reporting will do is it will enforce integrity within that report. It doesn't let you refer to a cell that doesn't exist. It'll just bomb out. But FR, a lot more loosey-goosey about that. So the import was so difficult, they kind of just like they bagged it, and they didn't even complete the migration. One thing to note about that though is FR, it's going to be available in all the pieces out there, but it's only going to talk to the databases in the application that you're logged into, like that it's part of. And so what this client has to do is move data from place to place if they want to be able to report on it over here, but it's generated over here, they've got to move it over. And management reporting would have been able to connect to different ones to pull data from the different pods. So they went and took on the pain of data migration and duplication across their pods because the migration itself was just too difficult to try and do. So that's the migration half of the presentation, or I guess more than half actually, but I'm going to touch on the customizations that I referred to as well. And how might I do that same customization that I did way back a long time ago? How would I try and do that today? So let's take a quick look at the way customization has worked. I'm going to focus on Hyperion Planning because that's really where it's happening right now in terms of the power to make changes and using Groovy language to do that. Back in the day, as I described a bit before, we had JavaScript, and it was in there, and there was a little bit of documentation on that. Probably the best documentation that was ever created for this capability was contained in a presentation that I did in Monterey at Kaleidoscope in 2009. And I had pulled the whole thing apart because I was doing, even more, going even deeper down the rabbit hole on making these changes. So I had learned a lot about how that worked, and I documented it in a way that no one had ever done. It wasn't really ever a very popular feature, but it could do some things, validations, and actually change data in there, lock cells down and do different things. But one of the issues was it was only available through the web. And back in those days, nobody liked using the web application. It was always all SmartView, or at least at my company. So there was a limited reach of that. When they released PBCS on Valentine's Day 2014, it did not have this JavaScript layer in the user interface that we could take advantage of. And so customization per se didn't really exist for a long time. But they did add a feature where you could do just use the user interface and set up rules for how you might color code cells to indicate that they're out of compliance with whatever your validation rules are. So not quite customization, but it's a similar stuff that we were able to do with that. And then when EBPCS came out with the Groovy feature added in, and this was really cool. I was on the beta team that helped me kind of validate this and get it working to be released. There's some cool stuff in here. I can work with data in the grid. I can change cell properties. I can do validations. I can prevent it from being saved. That's one thing that the old thing can do. There wasn't a capability like in that in-between time to stop the data from going in the database before the validation rules run. I can do that now. And I can still do the old style validation rules from the PBCS days. That feature still exists, but I've got a lot more power to do it within Groovy. You've probably heard the word Groovy a lot. We've been talking about that. Just in case you're not quite clear with that, Groovy is a full-fledged programming language, just like Java and a lot of the language that you've heard of, like this Smalltalk Ruby. And it's been embedded into planning business rules. So I can use this language. And they've kind of limited what it can do, the power of, because it's super powerful. And they don't want you, reading and writing files on the cloud server. So they've limited some of the stuff that it can do. But the language, the whole programming language is there. And I've been an advocate for that language for about a decade now. I used to use it for other reasons. So I was really excited when I get the chance to use it inside of planning. There's two ways that I can use it. I can either use it like a string manipulation process where I can generate language for the old traditional calc script language, but I can make that be exactly what I need it to be right now based on current conditions, and spin up a calc script on the fly and then just hand it off to the Essbase engine to be run. And then I can also just do stuff in Groovy. I can retrieve data from the database. I can look all through the data that I found. I can even reach out to other things. Just a lot of power there. And that's not acting as a calc script rule with that language at all. It's just complete functionality within Groovy. So that's pretty cool. This is far too many bullets for me to bother going through for you today, but they're here. And what we're saying here is there's a lot of different things that you can do with Groovy, and there's things that we haven't thought of yet, and there's things that are going to be added in the future. This is really cool, and if you want to be really creative in making your planning application really whiz bang, this is where it's at on that. And there's so many things that you can do. I've got 2 screens full of bullets. I'll call out one of these, the create complex scripts in ASO. That's really cool. If you've tried to do procedural calcs or allocations, that stuff's really limited. You can do the same kind of really powerful Groovy scripting if you're connecting to an ASO cube as you can do if you're connecting to a BSO cube / hybrid. So that part is really cool. You can begin to get creative. We're getting into the world now where you can create your entire planning application as all ASO. And you can do all the calculations that you need to do within Groovy, and it's a complete paradigm shift for certain kinds of planning applications. It'll work. The what you'll see here when they introduced Groovy rules, they introduced 2 new ways that I can tie them into events within the planning application. Now, those of you that are planning admins, you'll recognize the first checkbox, set of checkboxes here, and the last 3, but these 2 are new. And these only apply for Groovy business rules. I can run after the grid has loaded up and look at the data and do stuff with it, or I can run it before save and mess around and make sure that it's some data that I want to be saved to the database and run my validations that way. And I can just stop the save, and I can provide information back to the user, very detailed information if I want to, about what I saw, why I stopped the save, and what they need to do in order to get it to work. So that's 2 new things. Most of the time, you're still going to be doing run after save, because most of the work you're doing is just traditional work. Like, I've saved the data, now I need to do stuff with it, roll it up or run calcs based on it or send it somewhere else. But these 2 have those special abilities to manipulate things before the user sees it, and then check that, make sure that it's good before I try and send it down the database and run anything that I might have attached as run after save. I'm going to touch on a few things that I've seen done with this. That are some pretty cool examples. There's so many different ways that we can use this, but these are a few of the highlights. It's really cool that I can act on only data in my form that is changed by the user. The cell turns like that gold yellow instead of pale yellow when they make a change, and then a lot of times my calcs run too long because the form is so big. And I can't really tie run on save rules to that form because it takes too long. So what you can do instead is use Groovy, and you can iterate through that entire grid and find only the places where data is different from when that grid loaded. And then I can use it in a bunch of different ways. I can spin up fixed statements that only reference, say, the cost centers in those rows of those cells where data has changed. Or I can just loop through only those cells, and I can look over like what cost center is that related to, and then I can just spin out calc script code that only applies to those. Like I look at the row, and that's cost center 1. I can do cost center 1 equals calculation, and cost center 18 equals calculation, and I'm not having to run that through all the cost centers or whatever might be on the rows. So that's a really great way to streamline what happens and then spit out a really efficient calc script. I might even not have to aggregate certain dimensions if things haven't changed that in a way that requires that. This is the use case that I described, that I had addressed back in the day, where I might want to make that that diagonal read only, even though security says it's completely writable by the end user. What I'm going to do here, when I want to define what security has to say, I'm going to have Groovy run on a run after load, and I can do whatever I want in there to make decisions about what I want to be readable or writable, and I can just change that, and I can make that a business rule off to the side, which makes it better than just going in the form definition and going, okay, well, this row I don't want to be writable, or trying to kludge together something that gets me the list that I want with the things not writable, that I don't want to be. I can just throw it out there as a business rule. I can attach it, run after load, run after load, run after load on as many forms as I want, and it will go through and it will find the cells that are related to the things I don't want you writing to right now. I want you to write to it on other forms, but not this one. And I can just render those read only, and I can just reuse that code over and over again. And I can also do the thing in reverse. If security says I can't write to this, but in this case, on this form, I actually want you to be able to input data, that's fine. I can do that on the run after load. Security is still going to prevent you from writing that data to the database in the traditional sense, where I hit submit and it goes. I'll have to use Groovy to go through the grid and find where you did that if you entered data, and then go do something about it within Groovy, because Groovy can write to wherever I need it to by just creating a grid and populating it and sending it down to the database. And the last one is something that we're doing is really cool, is it's leveraging the REST APIs of other services. This is within the EPM suite, but I can reference REST API out somewhere else as well, and pull data or interact with anything out there through an HTTP connection. But this is a use case where, like, we're doing this right now, and I think it's really, really cool. We're like in real time, we have people that are entering data in on a planning application. And when they hit save, those business rules are doing all the work that needs to happen for planning right now, and then kicking off a migration of that data over into a profitability and cost management application, and then kicking off on that side an allocation rule, so everything runs. And so we've got these complex allocations, but we're not doing it in planning like a lot of people have done before. We're pushing it over into the allocation engine and letting it do that work, and then we're doing a query from that application and exporting that data, bringing it back into planning, and then doing the work that we need to do at that level and rolling it up from there. And this is really cool. It's one of the prime examples of how to use REST API to have all the different pods talking to each other and kicking off processes on the other sides. But it can be generalized as well into a lot of other possibilities. This is the one, this REST API capability is the one that the more you think about it, the more limitless it seems to you, the possibilities for what you can make a planning application do. And so the bottom line here, if I can just lay it all out, I don't know exactly how easy it is for you specifically to get into the EPM cloud. Depending on who you are, it could be really quick, or maybe you'd be completely new to it. It may be difficult to get you out there. But once you're there, I hope that I have illustrated at least a little bit that once you're there, there's a lot of stuff that you can do inside of there that's never been available to you before, just because all those products are there, and I can create as many of them as I want, and I can use these powerful customization features to really create powerful applications. So yeah, I ran right up against my time, but I would very much love to see if there are any questions from the field. If I can answer one or two, then I want to do that. And then I gotta clear the stage because there's somebody else coming up after me. I'm going to put up our schedule for webcasts, and then I'll just check in with Allie to find out if there are any questions that I need to answer.
We don't have any questions yet, but oh, looks like one just popped through. Does Groovy come with EPM Cloud?
Absolutely, yes. It's going to be inside of planning, but it's there automatically. You'll use Calc Manager when I'm going to go create a business rule in Calculation Manager. I'll have to just go way up in the upper right. It's kind of hidden, and I'll change the type of rule that is from script or something to a Groovy business rule, and then I just start writing Groovy code within Calc Manager. From there on, it's just deployment and treating it just like any other business rule.
Any other questions for Joe? What other languages did you say Groovy was like?
Oh, it was first created by people that were really hardcore and really great Java developers, and they kept saying, you know, wouldn't it be really groovy if Java could do this, or wouldn't it be really groovy if Java could do that? Because Java is really verbose. So it's very, very similar to Java in terms of what that syntax looks like. But the things that they're saying, wouldn't it be groovy? Wouldn't it be groovy if it could do this the way Ruby does? Wouldn't it be great if it could do Y like Smalltalk does, or do this like Python does? So those are a lot more modern languages, not Smalltalk. Smalltalk's been around a long time, but they wanted Java to be easier to work with and a lot less verbose. So they pulled these things in, but the most languages that you'd find similarities to, I would say, would be Python and Ruby. Perhaps Scala as well.
Awesome. How did you go about learning Ruby? Documentation or training or trying to write something?
This is a real important question for people that are looking to see how far they can go with this. Now, I personally have always been a coder, so I've written in a lot of different languages. And the reason I adopted Groovy was because I had struggled with getting the Java API really leveraged into the work that I was doing at the company that I worked at, because there's a lot of extra stuff that goes on with having to write Java. But because Groovy can interface with Java libraries super duper easy, I was able to use it as a scripting language and do automation. I had a real leg up because I already knew Java syntax and I'd written in a lot of other languages. If you're someone that has written programming before, if you know like Visual Basic for applications, if you're a whiz writing macros inside of Excel or something like that, you have a leg up. You've got that technical experience where you've seen it before, and you can begin to learn that language. There's a lot of information available just on the web to kind of look at. I also I whipped it out the other day. I'm not sure what I did with it, like a 400-page book that I bought to learn Groovy like top to bottom. For using it inside of planning, there's a lot of examples that you can look at, and there's several bloggers out there that are writing sample code, and I think almost anybody could learn enough to adapt these things and learn this and use it and do similar things that other people are doing, kind of adopt practices that other people have done, and use the examples as inspiration. But you're going to have to really be somebody who can really be a programmer to really go hardcore and invent your own ideas or implement your own. You can create your ideas all you want, but implementing them will be up to somebody that really is more of a hardcore coder. And I don't know for any individual what your learning curve is going to be. If you know programming, it's going to be pretty easy. If you know Java, it's going to be really easy. If you've never programmed before, there's a lot of hills to climb to become a Groovy, maestro.
Great. So someone wants to clarify, Groovy does not apply to FCCS or ARCS, etc., just planning?
Not at this time. I don't know what the plans are. I see Rich Wilkie has joined us. He may be able to tell us if there's any future plans for that, but as far as I know,
Joe, go ahead. On the roadmap for consolidations and should be rolled out into the December or early next year. So Groovy's coming.
Okay, so as of now, it's not, but
Coming soon.
On the roadmap, and that's pretty exciting too, because FCCS has been on Rails for a long time. I'll be interested to see what capabilities you've created in the FCCS API. It's going to be really cool. What luck that we had Rich Vilke join us just in time to take that question.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions? If not, we will thank Joe. We thank you for your time. Great presentation. We will get started in about 10 minutes with Rich and Al, who are going to present migrating from HFM to EPM Cloud. So stay on to enjoy some music and some slides, and we'll get started with our final presentation for Solutions 2020. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.